In the spring of 2007, at a press event in the United States, a reporter asked the chief executive of Microsoft what he thought of Apple's new telephone. Steve Ballmer did not answer right away. He laughed. He laughed the way a man laughs when he has already won, head back, shoulders shaking, and then he gave his answer. That is the most expensive phone in the world, and it doesn't appeal to business customers because it doesn't have a keyboard. He added later that year a prediction with no hedge in it at all. There was no chance the iPhone would win any significant share of the market. No chance. 8 years after the laugh, Microsoft would write off $7.6 billion, more than it had paid for the entire phone business of Nokia, and let go more than 20,000 of the people who came with it. This is the story of how two empires answered the same fire. One of them wrote it down as a parable, and the parable came true in every detail but one. To understand the size of the fall, you have to stand at the top of it. In the winter of 2007, the Finnish giant sold 4 of every 10 telephones on Earth and half the world's smartphones. It was not merely a company. In Finland, it was closer to a national organ. At its height, it carried around 4% of the country's entire economy and a fifth of its exports. Towns rose around it. In Salo, in the flat green southwest, the phone factory was the town, the paychecks, the mortgages, the reason the lights were on. In Oulu, near the top of the world, thousands of engineers built the software. Entire school years grew up assuming Nokia would hire them, the way harbor towns once assumed the sea. And in Redmond, Washington, sat the other kingdom. Microsoft's software ran 9 of every 10 computers on the planet. Its chief executive could laugh at a rival's product on camera because for 20 years, betting against Microsoft had been the fastest way to look foolish. 2 empires, an ocean apart, each certain the future would keep the shape of the present. Neither noticed they had both just heard the explosion. The fire did not look like fire at first. It looked like a toy, an expensive glass rectangle with no keyboard, launched in 2007 to reviews that called it beautiful and doubted it mattered. Then, in the autumn of 2008, Google shipped Android and gave it away free. The ground under both kingdoms began to warm. Phones stopped being things that made calls and became small computers that ran applications, and the war stopped being about hardware and became a war of ecosystems. Developers, app stores, the 10,000 small programs a customer will not do without. Nokia's engineers saw it coming. The company had prototypes and platforms and committees, and it moved like a committee. Microsoft saw it too and answered with what had always worked: another version of Windows, licensed to anyone who would pay. Nokia's own engineers had even built an escape raft, a sleek new system called MeGo. Its only child, a phone named the N9, would ship in 2011 to admiring reviews, and it was condemned before it reached the shelf. By the autumn of 2010, the iPhone owned the imagination, Android owned the volume, and the 2 old empires owned the past. That September, Nokia did something it had never done in 145 years. It hired an outsider to run the company, a Canadian from Microsoft named Stephen Elop. 5 months into the job, the new chief executive sat down and wrote his people a warning. There is a pertinent story about a man who was working on an oil platform in the North Sea, the memo began. He woke up one night from a loud explosion, which suddenly set his entire oil platform on fire. The man could stay, the memo said, and be consumed by the flames, or plunge 30 meters into the freezing waters. He jumped. And after his rescue, he noted that the burning platform had caused a radical change in his behavior. "We too are standing on a burning platform," Elop wrote, and we must decide how we are going to change our behavior. The diagnosis inside the memo was merciless and largely true. The first iPhone shipped in 2007, and we still don't have a product that is close to their experience. And sharpest of all, we poured gasoline on our own burning platform. The memo leaked within days in February of 2011, and the whole industry read Nokia's confession in Nokia's own hand. 3 days after the leak, Elop announced the jump. Nokia would abandon its own software, the platforms it had built over decades, and bet every future phone on one partner's operating system. Not Android, the water most of the industry was already swimming toward. Windows Phone, the system built by the company Elop, had just left. The parable had promised that the jump saves the man. The water had other ideas. The moment Nokia declared its old software dead, customers stopped buying it. Why buy a phone with an expiration date? And the old platform's sales fell off a cliff years before the new phones existed in volume. When the Lumia line finally arrived, reviewers praised the cameras, the colors, the design. Then they opened the App Store, the applications that organized modern life, the banks, the airlines, the photo-sharing networks teenagers actually used, were missing, or late, or abandoned. Developers would not build for a platform without users, and users would not come to a platform without applications. Windows Phone never climbed past roughly 3% of the world's smartphones. Nokia's share of the smartphone market, half the world in 2007, fell into single digits by 2013. That September, the rescue boat arrived, flying Microsoft's flag, $7.2 billion for Nokia's entire phone business, and 25,000 employees crossed over with it. Stephen Elop crossed back to Microsoft too, carrying a departure package of 18.8 million euros, 70% of it paid by Microsoft. Finland's prime minister called the payout quite outrageous on national television. In Salo, they used a harder word. Many Finns had come to see Elop as a horse sent into the citadel, a suspicion for which there was never evidence and which he always denied. The anger did not need a conspiracy. The numbers were enough. 5 months after the deal closed, Microsoft had a new chief executive. Satya Nadella had been asked in an internal poll whether Microsoft should buy Nokia's phones, and he had voted no. "I did not get why the world needed the third ecosystem in phones," he wrote later in his memoir, "unless we changed the rules." Now the third ecosystem belonged to him. In July of 2014, Microsoft cut 18,000 jobs. 12,500 of them were former Nokia people. 1 year later came the number that made it official. In July of 2015, Microsoft wrote off $7.6 billion on the acquisition, more than it had paid in the first place, and cut 7,800 more jobs. In Salo, the lines went silent. The town the phones built had already watched the factory close. Now the last of the phone jobs left, and unemployment in the little city climbed toward 1 in 6. In 2016, Microsoft sold what remained of the feature phone business for $350 million, a 20th of what it had spent. In 2017, the executive in charge of the platform finally said in public what the empty store had been saying for years: the app makers were not coming, and Microsoft would build no more phones. In January of 2020, the system received its final update and went dark for good. The platform had finished burning. The man from the parable was safe and dry, and $25 million richer. The people who had actually been standing on the platform, the engineers in Salo and Oulu, the assembly workers, the town, were in the water. Here is the strange coda. The Finnish giant never died. Strip away the phones, and the company walked out of its own fire. It builds the network equipment inside the world's cell towers today, and another firm licenses its name onto new handsets. The brand on the phones died. The company survived by leaving it behind. And Microsoft waited a decade, and then, in the spring of 2026, at its own developer conference, unveiled a new mobile platform and let the world know it intends to try again. A new phone that runs its software ships in the autumn of 2026. The new platform is not even built on Windows. It is built on Android, the water Microsoft refused to swim in the first time. The empire is walking back toward the sea that drowned it. It can afford to. It is larger now than it ever was, having become a titan of clouds instead of handsets. But before it steps back into the water, there is a memo worth rereading. The burning platform was real. So were the fire and the cold water, and every line of the diagnosis came true. The parable only lied about one thing. In the story, the man on the platform gets to choose. In Salo, the platform simply burned, and the choosing was done 3,000 miles away by men who were never going to get wet. In the spring of 2026, Microsoft announced its return, but the Postmortem writes itself. The only question is whether anyone reads it before the next one.